Hello and welcome to the Quilling Quarter. My name is Charlotte. At the start of January 2021, I sat down with quilling artist, blogger and book author Anne Martin. She is the brains behind the All Things Paper blog. She's published 3 books and is very active promoting other artists, especially on Instagram. And she is a very talented and creative quiller herself. When I was researching for this interview, I came across Anne's Twitter page where she describes herself as hunter, gatherer, sharer, and papercraft book author. So I thought this was a fantastic description and a fantastic way to structure this interview today. So this interview will be broken into those 3 segments: hunter and gatherer, sharer, and papercraft book author. Hope you enjoy. To ask you, how did you get into paper quilling?
I just by chance happened to see a magazine article. Martha Stewart, Living, in 2002, did a February issue that featured quilled valentines. And I just took one look and was instantly captivated, said, I'm going to learn how to do this. There was just no question in my mind.
Before we learn a bit more about Anne's quilling story, I wanted to share a fun clip of Anne that I found from 2009 where she featured on a segment for HGTV. She has a fantastic line that I want to show you. Here it is.
It's quilling, not quilting. Lots of times when I search quilling on the internet, it will say, "Don't you mean quilting?" No, I mean quilling, with 2 L's.
So tell me the story about the All Things Paper logo.
Well, that came a little later in my quilling career. I started to do wedding invitations that would be framed. I wouldn't do a whole batch of invitations, in other words, for the bride to send out. I would just do a wedding invitation that was with a mat and decorated it with quilling, and then it would be framed and the couple could hang it in their home. A lot of times people at least in the US, I'm not sure that it's a worldwide thing, but people like to do that here and give that as a wedding gift sometimes, or the couple will want, to have it done for themselves. And then I found out about marriage certificates via a quilling class that I was taking. She was getting married and asked me to do her marriage certificate. I didn't know what that was, but she introduced me to this whole concept of the particular religion that she was, marries the couple in front of everyone in the congregation of the church, and they sign this large document with signatures that they'll support the couple in their marriage. And the vows are written in calligraphy, and then often these are decorated, like I do with quilling, and then the couple hangs that on their wall as a memento of the ceremony. And it's just a really nice concept, I think. And anyway, it has spread from beyond that religious sect to everyone seems to like that idea. And it's also very common in the Jewish faith that they do something called a ketubah. So I have done marriage certificates and ketubahs. And so the header on my blog is a shot of one of those marriage certificates that I did for a couple.
I remember seeing on your Facebook page where that particular piece came from, and there was like a candelabra on
yes,
that. And
that bride, yes, the same bride requested a chandelier on her certificate. And that was, I have to say, probably the hardest design I've ever done because it has to be so balanced, So there was lots of, I use a laser level when I'm doing the quilling and kept it straight that way.
And you mentioned previously that you worked with a calligrapher on those pieces?
Yes, well, the marriage certificate has the vows or whatever text the couple wants on it to be done in beautiful lettering. And I was a calligrapher myself for a while, but I wouldn't say I was a professional by any stretch of the imagination. So I went back to my teacher. I had taken a calligraphy class, and she and I collaborated for a number of years on these certificates.
That's so cool.
And she would do the lettering and yeah.
Yeah. And that album you have on Facebook, the marriage certificates you've done are amazing, and the logo.
Oh, thank you.
How do you find new artists and trends in papercraft? What's your method?
Google is my friend. I've always been a window shopper. And I absolutely love just doing the same thing online. I'll look all around. People do write to me and introduce themselves and say, this is what I do. And so lots of times I've gotten ideas for blog features that way. And I welcome that. But I also do a lot of looking around. I'll just type, something into Etsy and say, show me who's doing, paper cutting or paper folding or paper lighting, and oh my goodness, so much comes up. There's way too many choices. There did not used to be as many when I started blogging more than a decade ago. Um, there just wasn't as much information online about paper art and paper craft, but it has exploded in the past decade.
Yeah. And you started your blog in about 2009?
9. Mm-hmm. And I began quilling, like I said, in 2002. And in those years, I just practiced, did a lot of card making. That was probably what I started. I had joined a Yahoo card making group in England. And those women, I just love them all. It's just such a great sense of humor, really dry wit. And so I enjoyed that group so much. But they introduced me to all sorts of techniques of rubber stamping and iris folding and teabag folding, all sorts of things I had never heard of. And so I would incorporate those along with quilling into my cards. And then I wound up submitting them to, there used to be a lot more papercraft magazines than there are now, actual physical magazines. And so I would submit designs to magazines and occasionally would, have one that was accepted. And back then we would actually mail the card to them to be photographed. And then I would write up the patterns. So that was where I learned, I think, to write patterns and step-by-step tutorials like I post on my blog now.
Did I hear you correctly say teabag folding?
Teabag folding. Yes, it's not actual tea bags, believe it or not, although people do paintings on tea bags. I don't know if you've seen those. But teabag folding are actually little squares of printed paper that are, oh my goodness, so tiny and folded to and interlock and create beautiful designs.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the sort of the last almost 12 years or so you've been running your blog, have you noticed any trends or any trends falling in and out over those years?
I think quilling has grown exponentially, and not due to my blog by any stretch. I think Yulia Brodskaya, who will be a familiar name to lots of quillers for sure, but also people in the paper art world, just has brought it to the forefront with her beautiful, her designs just flow and are wonderful. And then many people have been inspired by Yulia to quill. But paper art in general, there just seem to be more paper cutters. There have always been a lot of origami artists, and I think probably of books that are published that have to do with paper art and paper craft. There's way more origami than any other paper art craft. Yes.
Yeah, I've noticed quite a few origami artists on your blog.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Was there a particular moment when you saw the uptick? Was it from Yulia or
I don't know, that there was any certain time. There were a lot of quilling blogs for a while, but those have tapered off, and a lot of people, it is quite a bit of, it takes persistence to continue blogging for years and years. And I just happen to love writing, so I really enjoy posting, and I still get a thrill every time I hit publish and a new post goes live. But I think that a lot of people found that difficult to keep up with. So, and then they've also, of course, so many people have moved to Instagram and Facebook, so blogs aren't quite as relevant as they used to be, but they have the wonderful aspect of lasting. I mean, an Instagram post, gets buried so quickly. So blog posts are around, and anytime, like if someone wants to Google a certain artist that they've heard about on Instagram or Facebook, then they'll find, a blog post about it that I might have written or someone else has.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought, and it's kind of same with email. Like there's always the worry that email is dead, but I don't think it is, and same with blogging.
No,
Blogging's dead.
I still love email most of all as my way of communication because then I have a record of what has been said. Like when I worked with various clients over the years for wedding work, it was nice to have that. They would often say, can I call you? And I would no, because well then I'd have to either take really really good notes, but it's also nice just to have a typed out record, that I can refer to in my inbox.
You've gathered quite a large following since 2009 on your blog and across your various social media channels. Does that sort of
Mhm.
make the hunt for new artists easier? And do you find a lot of artists reach out to you?
Quite a few have reached out, and like I said, I welcome that for sure. Um, it's it takes time to make a dent. I will say that. I mean, back in the early days of blogging, I was like, is anyone reading this? Of course, I think we all feel that way when we start out, but little by little. And in the beginning, I was just on Twitter, and I absolutely loved it. Met so many people who are friends to this day via Twitter. Now I'm not on there as much. I've moved to Instagram more. But Pinterest, of course, is a really valuable tool in bringing traffic to a blog. So once a post goes up nowadays, it's I used to just be done with it when the post went live, but now I have to go around to all the different platforms and share, that this is new on the blog. Go read it, please.
You mentioned you get a bit of a thrill when you post a new blog post. What kick do you get out of it?
Just say it's an artist interview. I love to feature people who are not very well known. I tend to not feature those who are already famous in the paper art world. And it's not that I don't admire their work. Oh my goodness, I just think there are so many fabulous paper artists. But I like to help the underdog, I guess. Like somebody who has a brand new Etsy shop and has never had a sale, but is doing really imaginative something, doing something that I know is different. Because I have to admit, I pretty much know what's out there because I look so often. I just love like the thrill of the hunt. So I just enjoy featuring people who aren't well known and sometimes their work has been picked up from my site and gone on to sites like My Modern Met or This is Colossal or one of the big art sites, and that is such a thrill because they're so happy to have their work recognized the way it should be.
Do you have any stories in particular of artists that you've shared that have gone on to bigger and greater things?
Um,
Or
well, one that comes to mind is Lisa Nilsson in Massachusetts here in the US. Quillers may remember her for doing anatomical quilling that's very unique. And I didn't find Lisa. Another quiller just happened to find a photo of hers online and sent it to me and said, "Wow, have you seen this?" And I hadn't, and I was wowed and wound up finding Lisa myself and contacted her, and she was happy to be featured, and we struck up a friendship. And actually, I wound up. She and her husband invited me and my husband to their home and took us out to dinner, and we had to her art studio. It was just delightful, and getting to know her and seeing her work in person was just mind blowing because it is so much more beautiful than what you even see online. She cuts her own strips. She uses a lot of gilded edge strips, but she'll cut them from actual old books. And then she uses actual mulberry paper. Cuts her own strips from mulberry paper. Lovely, beautiful, beautiful work.
and do you have an artist that you particularly admire, or whenever they produce new work, you're always excited to see it?
A lot of artists are always coming up with new things just because they're creative people. I often feature Renata of Mayumi Origami. She's a jewelry designer, and she often comes up with new series of her origami jewelry, earrings usually, also necklaces and she just does fabulous work. And so I've often featured her on the blog.
Tell me the journey about writing your first book.
Well, I guess that's part of why I started my blog initially, because I said I'd been doing card making and submitting to magazines, and I built up quite a quantity of designs that I wanted to be featured in, that I hoped would someday be featured in a book that I hadn't shown on my blog yet. So they were all going to be, fresh designs. So I started to reach out to publishers, and I actually met someone on Twitter who introduced me to her agent. And the agent and I worked together to reach out to even more publishers. And actually in the beginning, the publishers would say, that they really liked my work, but they just didn't think there was going to be enough of an audience for a Quilling book. But then one of the publishers said, but we really like what you're doing with your blog. Can you do a book that's similar to your blog content, but of course with all new tutorials? So that was how my first book came about, All Things Paper. And it was actually a collaboration. I reached out to artists all over the world who I had featured on my blog, and I knew their work well, and asked them to contribute projects to this new book. And there was a lot of interest, and the book turned out, I think, to be really beautiful. They all worked so hard. And rather than have them send all of their projects to me to photograph the steps, I relied on them to take their own photos. That meant that I knew that their photography had to be absolutely excellent. And I give my publisher, Tuttle, so much credit for trusting all of us to do that, to take book-worthy photos of the beauty shots and of the actual finished projects, but also, the step-by-steps had to be perfect too. So that was a real learning experience for all of us.
Yeah, gosh.
And then the second book was with the publisher of one of the card making magazines that I was involved with. So that was the second book. And again, that was a collaborative project. It was mostly my designs, but others also contributed to that book. And then my third book came later, and it was after I decided that I loved making quilt jewelry. And that was 20 jewelry designs.
How did you come up with the ideas for the jewelry in your book?
Oh, that's kind of a fun story. A friend sent me a package of the metallic edge quilling paper. I'd never seen it. She said, "Oh, you have to see this paper. It's really something else." And she was right. And I should give her credit for starting me down that path. It's Rosie Graham in England. And I just spent several evenings sitting at my kitchen table using this package of paper to make necklace pendants. And I happened to wear one to a museum, to an art opening at a museum. And this woman walked past me, and all of a sudden I noticed she stopped in her tracks and kind of backed up and was staring at my necklace. And she said, "I love that." And I said, "Oh, I was caught by surprise. And I said, "Thank you very much. It's paper." And she was like, "No. Paper? That can't be paper. You have to see this paper to realize it truly is metal." I have that piece right here. I don't know if it will show up if I hold it up. I don't know if you can see the shine. Are you capturing that? Anyway, and it truly is. It just looks like metal. And so that I thought, oh my goodness, okay, if this story is attracting attention from a stranger, then maybe I'm onto something here. So I kept coming up with more designs. And then how did that book come about? I don't remember if the publisher contacted me or I contacted them. I don't remember. But anyway, it came to be.
I think I remember reading that some of your earlier pieces that you exhibited were of keys as well.
Yes, I did a key design, and that also I can attribute to Rosie Graham, because she suggested one day, she said, "I think, doing a quilled key would be really neat." And several years later, I thought, for some reason that I just stuck in my mind. And I have an old-fashioned Victrola it was actually a wedding gift, and it has a very ornate key in the lock. And that was what was my first sample. Do I have it? Yes, I have it here too. I can show you. And just so this is the paper one, and
That is so cool.
I wound up making a ring of keys, and that's what this is. And there's a similar key to that Victrola key in this one also. But so for several years, I've made different kinds of keys. And so there's one of those actually, well, that may date back to my first book. I think that's in All Things Paper, a tutorial for making that one. But there's other jewelry, obviously other designs in the newest book.
So roughly what year did you make those pieces?
The jewelry book came out in 16, probably 11, 12,
Okay.
13, in that range.
Because you can definitely, like in those pieces, you can definitely see the influence and impact it has on your jewelry designs. You can see.
Yes.
See
Oh, yes. Yep. And then I did this. I guess you could say I'm key crazy, but I did this one. This is a necklace with colorful. This is Italian metallic crepe paper that creates the shaft, and then I use the metallic edge paper for the tops of the keys.
In your opinion, what's the hardest part, or in your experience, I should say, what's the hardest part about writing a book?
About writing a book, probably the time that it takes. There's just so much checking. I mean, there's wonderful editors who do that for you also, but in the end, you're the one who's ultimately responsible for absolutely every word and to getting all the measurements exactly right so that people can recreate what you've made, so that they're not frustrated, and you want the directions to be clear. So much goes into it behind the scenes. I know people don't realize it. I didn't realize it myself until you get started. And of course, each publisher is different. They all have their different rules and regulations. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And did you find it hardest to write, or which one did you find easier, your first book or your subsequent books?
They were all different. I think I probably had a pretty good handle on writing tutorials for sure by the time I got to the jewelry one. Yeah. So maybe that, I don't know.
So that was the easier one.
They're all my babies, what can I say?
Do you have a piece that's especially special to you, or one that you're most proud of that you've made?
I am partial to this ring of keys. I've done so many. Some of the marriage certificates were very, very special. My son was married, and I gave him and his wife their invitation that I quilled, and they have that hanging in their home and seem to love it. But I find that most wedding couples love whatever you quill for them because they've chosen their invitation and they've chosen their color palette, and so the quilling just adds to what they already love. So wedding work, I think all of my wedding work is special to me. One of the marriage certificates had a woodland theme, and that was a pretty darn interesting one to do because I had to incorporate all sorts of woodland creatures. They wanted an owl and a blue jay and a little mouse and oh my goodness, all sorts of things. And I'm like, oh, I'm not so sure how this is going to look, but it wound up being actually pretty darn cool. And they loved it. And it's one of my favorites. And then I had another couple request that I do the same thing, which, oh boy, that's kind of hard. I'm kind of a one and done person. I like to do a design once and then move on and come up with something else that's at least a little bit different, but they wanted the same, but in a different color palette. So that made it somewhat different.
Oh, interesting. Do you find, just on that sort of note, do you find having commissions and challenges quite interesting to sort of make you produce different and new work?
Oh, absolutely. It expands. I mean, I mean, even colors, there were certain colors I didn't used to care for a whole lot, but when you see the different requests that people, give you that that they've chosen as their wedding palette, I come to love them all by the time I'm done with the project, really.
Yeah, it's interesting because you'd never sort of pick certain color combinations or certain ideas and designs. It's
Right.
awesome. Mixed
Right. Yep.
What's your favorite quilling tool?
Oh, my favorite tool. I'm very partial to a Japanese slotted tool that is, really a precision instrument. It's very slim, but easy to hold at the same time. It has a very fine tip so that the inner rotations of the coil are quite tiny. And it's just fits so easily in my hand, and I love it. And I wouldn't have found that one except I went to a Quilling Guild convention, and a quiller from Japan was there with the tool, and she sells it via her store in Japan. And she demonstrated it to me, and I was just like, oh, I'm going to buy one on the spot. I just, I just love that tool.
What's your favorite quilling technique?
I like both the very modern, more linear quilling, just, that scrolls or line work, it's called, as well as the traditional quilled coils, all of the, the closed coil, the loose coil, the marquee, the V scrolls, all of those. I love to do them too, but I like a mixture of both.
And what are your thoughts on that? The line quilling, the on edge?
I think it's great. I welcome it. I think it's very modern. I like it very much, but I tend to like very simple designs, minimalistic, I guess they're called. So that the linear designs fit in with that.
That's great. And final question, what project or projects are you working on right now?
I quilled a circular necklace pendant and gave it as a birthday gift to my other son's fiance. And I think I'll make one for myself. I just happened to come across an extra package of paper I'd forgotten that I have, which was just a delight. And so that one's going to be silver. Hers was rose gold metallic edge, but this one's going to be silver. So I'm just now starting work on that, and I'm going to post that as a tutorial on my blog. And now that I've said that, I truly have to do it. So
I was going to ask that as the next question. Will we get to see it once it's finished?
I think so, yes. I plan to take pictures as I go along and take notes on the strip lengths and what have you.
That's fantastic. Yep. Thank you so much, Anne, for your time. It's been fantastic chatting with you and getting to know your story about how you discovered quilling and what you've done with it. It's just amazing.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to do this interview, and keep up the great work. Your channel is just a delight.
Thank you. And yeah, I personally have to thank you for not just the joy of writing this quilling book and inspiring me to make these earrings, but also for writing your blog and sharing such an amazing wealth of knowledge over the past decade for everyone. It's whenever I've got something that I want to look up about quilling or an artist that I want to learn more about, your blog almost always has a feature on it.
That's nice. Thank you so much.
But also for connecting artists and promoting artists and helping people explore new ideas. I think it's really, really special, and you've created a wonderful community, and we're all the happy recipients. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this interview with Anne Martin as much as I did. She has had an incredible impact on the paper art community for more than a decade. I love reading her books, her blogs, her Instagram posts, and I feel so lucky to have spoken with her. If you haven't already, I'd highly recommend you sign up to receive Anne's blog from All Things Paper that comes out every 3 weeks. It features projects, artist interviews, book reviews, tutorials, and new artists in the paper world, and also follow Anne on Instagram too. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.